Hey there guys, this is me, Malorian, and this is going to be a video on conversions and Warmachine and what I really feel we're going into a new age of when we're getting into this. And so really kind of get into this. I had already talked about this in the last Should Have Boosted episode in our podcast. If you haven't been listening to that, you probably should be. But since then, even if you have watched it, there's been a few more developments, at least here locally, and I've had a few more thoughts about it as well. So I thought, you know what, instead of like bringing it up in a future podcast again, because we always have to bring up new topics, I should probably cover this more here. This is a better way of me doing it. So what I'm going to be doing in this is I'm going to be talking about, well, first of all, just for those who aren't really fully aware, what conversions are all about very quickly. Then we're going to be talking about just kind of like the history of Warmachine, what their policies have been on conversions, and what we've kind of seen so far. And then we're talking about where we're going with this and where I might have some concerns. And the biggest thing I want to know from this is, whether you agree or not. I could be totally crazy and all these concerns are just like wild tin hat conspiracies, but let's just get right to it. So the first thing I want to talk about is just what are conversions. Now conversions are something that are very, very common no matter what game you're coming from. Whether it's 40k, fantasy, guild ball, Warmachine, conversions are going to be very common and a very fun thing to do. And it can range from a lot of different methods. It could be a kit bash where you're taking this kit and then something else and changing it. And like, okay, I'll take this head from here and put it on there. Or maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take some mold. I'm going to be taking some green stuff and I'm going to be molding something on there. Maybe adding a cape, maybe adding a hat, maybe making some hair, but kind of like adding to an existing model using that green stuff type of thing. The next thing is taking a model from a completely different source. Maybe you're doing this because you just like the look of this model from this different other game and you want to bring it over and it's pretty close to what you need, so that's it. Or maybe it's a conversion of all those, or combination rather of all those, where you're taking a model from this other system, bringing it over, doing some green stuff, doing some kit bashing, and there you go. You have this very unique and very interesting model. And I guess to kind of say why these things happen, it's for a multitude of reasons. One, and I guess would be the most simple one, is maybe the model just doesn't exist. For the very vast majority, whenever a game is going to come up with rules for people to use, there's a model to buy to do that. There's been a few cases I know of in the games I played where there's been rules coming out. It's like, oh, there's no model, so I'm forced to do a conversion in some way or a proxy or something like that. But more often, the reason why people are doing this is, for the first one, just to do something unique and personal. They want a model that really has a bit of their soul into it, if that's the way you want to say to it. Maybe the way they're making this, they want the wings to be more spectacular. Maybe they really love this character and they really want to stand out, so they're going to be adding a little bit more flair. Maybe it's a thing where they just don't really like the model that's there already. Maybe it's an old model with a very boring pose, especially the ones that are done with the old molding techniques are all made to be rather flat. So it's like, okay, one arm is up and one arm is down beside you, and that's really it, right? And they want to do something more looking like action. Maybe that's what it's all about. The second big reason is, of course, cost, right? You might have a model that's just, you love it, but it's just cost too much money, and now you want to find something that's a bit cheaper, so you're going to be converting to do something like that. So very quickly, that's what converting is all about. And now let's look at Warmachine and what's been happening so far. Now, when Warmachine releases their actual gameplay packages, it's not in the core rules, I don't think it is anyway, but when they have like the steamroller packs and stuff like that, there's a little section in there on conversions. So there's tight rules, of course, in those things, talking about how this is the way you'll be doing pairings for when you're doing the tournament, this is how the rounds will go, blah 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 blah. But they also have always a little blurb in there in conversions. And that's changed over the years. It's been fairly consistent, but there's been a few changes as they've gone. But by and large, what Privateer Press has wanted from their Warmachine conversions is that they want something where basically it's mainly the model that it was coming from before. It's mainly all privateer press parts. It's whatever weapon is supposed to be there is still there, and that there's no different weapons now there that aren't supposed to be there. And finally, just something where it's not infringing on anyone else's IP, because if you go and make something that's all like Super Mario Brothers or Space Marines, then all of a sudden that can start causing issues, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's I don't know if this would actually come up legally. Like GW would be taking privateer press to court because, oh, you're making, people are using these models and they're probably being forced to buy from us. I mean, like, who would actually sue over that? Maybe GW. They might actually sue over that. That might be something they actually do. But anyway, those are the core rules that they've mainly been having over conversions. And again, maybe a big thing I want to stress here right now is that it's not like these are super heavily enforced. I mean, it's not like Privateer Press is out there stalking in the shadows, making sure, like, what are you using for your models? They're not tapping into your webcams and sneaking around in like your backyard. Those things aren't really happening. And really, it's just people playing in their basements. It's people playing at their stores. It's people playing wherever. And probably the only place where they have like solid control over it is if you're going to a large, like, their final Iron Gauntlet, and then they're kind of looking at these things. They're going to be going on the streams, and they're going to be a little bit more picky and choosy. But for the most part, you have to kind of realize that as long as the other players are cool with it, and more importantly, that the tournament organizer is cool with it, hey, it doesn't really matter what it says in the rule packs. You're there to have fun, and you're going to do what you want. One example that I remember from my fantasy days is that somebody had an ogre army that they were posting videos about, where they're all just like these weird toys, and they did not look like what they're supposed to be at all. They were just like trying to realize, what are the ones with the hand weapons, what are the ones with the great weapons. It wasn't being represented whatsoever, but it was so ridiculous that nobody really complained about it. And in the end, that's what really matters. So that's important, but that aside, what have we been seeing in Warmachine so far? And note that when I say that your experience might be very different from mine. When I'm going to be commenting right now on what we've seen so far, I'm going to be commenting on my local area, what I've been seeing from battle reports, and more importantly, what I've been seeing from large events, right, and the coverage from there. Because that's going to be really like those top players, or the players are willing to travel around, and that's where those armies are being showcased. So I think that what I've noticed so far for conversions in Warmachine is by and large very minor. And I think a big reason for that, as opposed to my time in Fantasy and 40K where I saw a lot more conversions, is just the fact that Privateer Press models, by the way that they're designed, are not designed in a way that it's very easy to convert. And why I say that is because if I'm building a Space Marine, it is very compartmental. So that means that the way that the arms are going on, and the weapons, and the heads, and the legs, and all these other extra bits, there's lots of choices to be being made, and I can recombine these things very interesting ways, or whatever I feel like. Whereas when it comes to Warmachine models, in a lot of cases, they are single piece, or maybe it is a piece where this arm has to fit in here, this arm has to fit in here. It's a lot more common, whereas in like GW, where they have like ball joints, so you can really have full control of how you want them to be posed. That when it comes to Privateer Press models, there's like little knobs, and it has to fit in this way, or little like kind of grooves, or it has to go in this way. And so trying to convert that is already very difficult. I think as well because since a lot of the Privateer Press stuff is metal, whereas the Games Workshop stuff is plastic for the most part. You know, plastic is very easy to snip and trim and file if you want to do those conversions, whereas when you have these metal pieces, and if you want to like change a head, you're like having to like drill it out and do all these tough things. It's really hard to work with metal. So I think if nothing else, just the way that the models are made has been really pushing the direction that the players go, because I don't want this to be into like a Warmachine players versus a 40K players type thing, because let's be honest, the same type of people play in both. It's not like the evil people play one game and the good people play the other game. We're all the same people with the same type of families, you know, and a lot of people play both. So I think you really have to bring it down to what the game is doing to lead you down a certain way. And so I think really from the way that the models are made, that's why you saw in Privateer Press ones, by and large, there's not lots of conversions. Now, that's not to say that they didn't exist. If you went around, you might see like, oh, these people did these weapon swaps, or over here they did these head swaps, or in some cases they would go and like, oh, you can buy this pirate hats. I'm going to make all these things pirates and put them around like this. But very, very simple. You'd also see some more complex ones. One like locals that we have over here, Jeff Everett, he had this fantastic army, which was a Signar army where it was basically like all cricks and undead, so very, very heavily converted, so that like the storm walls were these floating wraiths with these long robes and these big scythes, and all of the models for the units, whereas most of the unit was exactly what was there before, all of a sudden had like skull heads and blah blah blah. Like, it was extremely cool. But again, that's a very small fraction. So you didn't see this very much whatsoever. Now, things are starting to change. And I think the biggest thing that's going to be changing with this, and we had talked about on the podcast, like I had mentioned, is the Hermit of Hengehold. Now, I don't want to get too much in this whole complaining part, because I think a lot of people realize that I have had issue with the fact that Privateer Press has been doing a lot of these things where like, oh, you want this model? Buy these pins. Oh, you want this model? Buy this art. And in a lot of those cases, like, sure, whatever, the model hasn't been key or anything like that, but this Hermit is a real big change. And the reason why that is because the Hermit of Hengehold not only has extremely powerful rules, but also works for every single faction. So for the one where the model comes with the pins, that's a minion model. Unless you're a minion player, you probably didn't really care. The James model that came with the art, unless you're a Convergence player, you probably don't super care. And so it wasn't that big of an issue. This Hermit one, where everybody wants it, now this is being linked with the Oblivion book. And if you want to get that, like for my Canadian prices here, that's like $80. Now, of course, that's not like $80 just for the model. Like I mentioned, that's for the Oblivion book. It comes with the cards. You can do the campaign. But the vast majority of people, at least in my opinion, aren't really super into the fluff. And I mean, they'll be like, oh, that's cool. You know, fluff is cool. Yeah. But they're not going to buy the books. So they really just want to buy the model. And in this case here, $80 to buy a Hermit model? And the problem is again, if this was a model where it's like, oh, the model's cool and I want it eventually, I can just wait for the next one. And I think a good example like that is like Eilish. Eilish is good, but it's not so critical that I know a lot of people, they're like, oh, I'm just going to wait till it's released later, no big deal. I didn't see a lot of people converting up their own Eilishes or anything like that. But the Hermit is a big, huge different one, and now I'm seeing that a lot. So again, maybe again to try and give some local feedback on this, or not a feedback, but more kind of perspective, is typically locally, the way that things have been really ruled is that if you want to use a model in a tournament, it had to be in War Room, or you had to have the cards, and it had to be out for released. So you had to already have the chance to get the model. So a good example of this then is something where there's the rules in War Room, but the model's not been released at all. Well, you can't play that. Or if you somehow got yourself your hands on a model, but it's not in War Room yet, too bad, you can't use that. I'm sure all the different areas had their own rules for conversions, but around here, that's been pretty standard. And by here, I mean like, in Alberta, Western Canada. So pretty much for you to use a model, the model had to be available and it had to be in War Room. Everything's fair for everybody competitively because now everybody can look up the rules, pretty much the model's available so you can get it. And so again, with that being put together like that, you didn't see a lot of conversions. It wouldn't be a thing where like, oh, I really need this. It's in War Room, but I haven't got it yet because I didn't go to this con, so I'm not going to quickly convert it up. That just didn't really happen. Hermit of Henchhold, now completely different. We just had a steamroller this last weekend, just yesterday really, and there were hermits all over the place and so many different conversions. Some of them I posted this on my Facebook where it was like a Kermit the Hermit, and the person had taken an agonizer and had turned it into a Kermit model, and it was hilarious, put robes on it with green stuff. Fantastic. Other ones they use completely just like, hey, this is a regular kind of like a mage from whatever game. I don't know if it's Reaper or whatever, but here it is. Or in other ones, very clearly they were like a GW fantasy Empire type wizard, and there you go. So all these different ones are out there, and I mean it was very clear. I mean, we had all talked about it and kind of expected it, and they kind of said that as long as you had a model that really represented the hermit, so something with, it was an old man, I guess it could be a woman, but in most cases it's old man with a long beard and a scroll, you're good to go. And so sure, it went through, and there wasn't a single issue. There wasn't a single issue, I guess I should stress that right away, where there's like, oh, I didn't know what that model was, or, oh, geez, I was going to go and kill this solo easily, but then it turned out to be the hermit where I had to hit it 5 times, and so now I lost the game. I didn't hear any of that at all. So it seemed like it went by very smoothly. But, at the very least, this is a stark difference from before. So whereas from before, if I saw a model on the table, hey, that thing that's a Mariner? That's a Mariner. Hey, super easy. See that thing over there? That's a Stormwall? That's a Stormwall. But now it's a thing where it's like, oh, that thing that I don't really recognize? Oh yeah, it's an old person with a scroll and a beard? Okay, it's a hermit. Okay, it took me a second, but no problem whatsoever. So that's where we are right now, and I could do some commentary about how I feel like this will be bad for Privateer Press, talking about how they're going to be losing out on money because I feel there's going to be a lot of people now not buying the model because of this. I did a poll on my Facebook page there, the Mr. Malorian meme page, where I asked like, hey, do you expect to be seeing in a year from now the conversions that people made, or are you going to be expecting to see more the actual model? And 2/3 of the people who replied were expecting to see just conversions. So that's a lot of money being lost by Privateer Press. So I can be talking about here, but like how I think it's a bad money decision, and I wish they would have just released the model on its own, and I think they would have made money hand over foot. Like if they would have sold online, here's your hermit model, whew, like they would have sold, I don't want to say thousands because that's probably way too crazy, but hundreds of that model, I am certain for sure. I mean, in my hands now though, on the flip side, here's my hermit. It's a GW got the money because I couldn't get the hermit. I'm not going to spend the $80 to get this, so I went with this. And when it finally comes out with the other one, will I buy it? I don't know. Now, we could talk about finances, but it's very controversial, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think. This is Privateer Press's company. They can do whatever they want, and they feel the best way to sell these things is to package them together and force you to get both, and then later on release it. Fine, that's their own business plan. But the biggest thing I want to kind of stress, though, and the biggest thing that I've seen is I think this is just the start of it. And I think that we might have opened a Pandora's box, because now we have, of course, more events coming up. I'm actually running the next one. It'll be a video. I want to talk about this later, about my teen roller idea. But I'm already getting questions about, like, well, can I be converting up this Archon? Can I be converting up this solo that's going to be a Riot Quest one? Can I be converting this? And like I said, it's like all of a sudden, this was never an issue before. It's not like every single tournament I had, it'd be like, oh, can I bring this conversion? Oh, can I do this? These things, I mean, there might be some person that made a conversion, like when I did my Thexus, that was like the Professor X one, but extremely rare and infrequent, and just not something that TOs really had to deal with. All of a sudden now, I'm getting a flood of people asking how my conversion policy is going to be, not just for the Hermit, but for a lot of models. And so this has many different things that brings up concerns with me. Again, we could be talking about the money part, where like anybody who does these conversions could be potentially taking money away from privateer press. It's not in all cases. Like in one case there, somebody wants to make an Archon that's going to be a Morrowind Archon based off of Constance Blaze. So at the very least, you know, the Constance Blaze model will be bought from Privateer Press. Who knows where the wings will come from? They're going to brass rod the spear to do that. But again, those Archons are a lot more money than a Constance Blaze. So instead of somebody spending, like, you know, the $50 for an Archon, they're going to be spending the $15 for a Constance. So again, we could be talking about that. But since I can't really be forcing my views on business ethics and etiquette or anything like that, the bigger worry I have is what the game is going to be like for all of us players. Because like I mentioned, typically before, you could look at a board and you can say, oh, that's that model because it's that model. Oh, that's that Jack because it's that Jack. Sometimes there's the odd conversion, didn't really exist very often. Or like in this one we just talked about, oh, that one model that looks like an old wizard, it's the Hermit. We all talked about it, we know that's what there'll be conversions all over about. But imagine a world where a lot more conversions start happening, where all of a sudden there's converted Archons, there's converted all these different solos from Riot Quest, converted this, converted that. You know, all of a sudden when people are new units are coming out, well, now if there's this whole case where people are doing conversions and bringing in from other games, well, now they'll be doing that too. So again, could be potentially money out of Privateer Press's wallet, but more concerning to me as a player is this what my player experience is going to be. I mean, it won't just be a thing where you have to sit down before a game and say like, oh, that terrain there, are we agreed that's rubble? Okay, cool. It's going to be like, okay, what are all these things that you have on the board here? Okay, that over there, okay, so that's the Menite Archon, and that's your Hermit. Okay, yeah, I saw that last tournament. And what's this? Oh, that's your converted Stormblades? Oh, okay, sure, cool. And this, oh, that's your Stormwall. Oh, because that's something completely different. Oh, no worries. Okay. And not only will it be a thing where you'll be adding time before a game, but it's also going to be something where it'll be just adding that confusion during the game. Or like, oh, I forgot that's what that was, and so now I misplayed. So that's some negative thoughts, but at the same time, let's bring in some positive thoughts, because that's what I always want to kind of focus on. Even when I have some concerns, I always want to try and show there's some silver lining. And what this could really be bringing into then is a new age of hobby in Warmachine. Like I kind of really started with, that's not a thing that really happened in Warmachine. In Warmachine, you didn't really see different conversions and stuff because you had singular models with singular ways things had to go in there. And so it wasn't common for people to be doing that. I think along with that, there's also, of course, we could bring in the whole idea that the whole hobby aspect hasn't really been pushed in Warmachine at all. Whereas in GW, they've been really pushing that if you want to play in GW games, you have to be fully painted. That's nothing that was really really pushed. That whole hobby aspect has not been a real part of Warmachine. I mean, maybe when you get to the higher tables where they're going to film you, they'll enforce that. But by and large, that's not an enforcement that you normally see. So it's a lot more common in Warmachine to see unpainted armies rather than painted armies. But this could really just start to trickle down where the hobby aspect becomes a lot bigger. I mean, all of a sudden, if people are spending more time to convert models to make something, unique and interesting to them, it's only natural that the next step is that they want to paint it, because especially when you do things like green stuff and you have like you're a little bit gray here, a little bit metal there, and then green all over here, it looks way better after you paint it. So all these things can come together where this hobby aspect is a lot bigger in Warmachine. Whenever you go to tournaments, I mean, you can't deny that playing against fully painted armies is something that adds to the game. Playing against models that look good brings something to the game. Something that you should really take some insight from is the fact that whenever there's painting competitions, the models that typically win are the ones with conversions, the ones that just look interesting. So it's like, oh, it's not one of those painted again. It's like, ooh, look at that, that's different. And then all of a sudden, if you're saying those models with conversions look better, well, that means if you're playing a game with more conversions, it's going to be more fun and be more interesting to play. So there's a lot of concerns and like the pros and cons coming into this, but I think we all have to realize that the Hermit of Henchhold is, I believe, the turning point in this whole story. That before Hermit, that's not really something we saw in Warmachine, and after the Hermit, it's really looking to me like it's going to be an escalating issue and benefit. So there's my video. It's a little bit long-winded, and it's something where I know there'll be a lot of people who might disagree with me, maybe because in your area that's not what anybody's doing. In your area, nobody converts. You have to buy the models. That's the way it is. Or maybe you just completely disagree with me when I say those little pieces about how I think it's bad business on privateer press. And again, I hope, even though I want to like include it as a thought in this video, I don't want it to be the sole focus. I want to be the focus on this is just where our community is going, hobby-based, because of this whole Hermit of Henchhold change, at least locally, where now a lot of people are converting. So I would love to hear your feedback. So down below, let me know what you're seeing in your area. Are you seeing lots of conversions with the Hermit of Henchhold? And are you starting to see now people talking about other conversions? Like I said, the Archons or the Riot Quest solos or things like that. So otherwise, there you go. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye.